The U.S. has released its 2020 International Religious Freedom Report. It is also announcing a visa ban on one Chinese official over his involvement in human rights abuses. A concentration camp survivor is exposing the atrocities she witnessed while detained. She shares her experiences about torture methods used there as part of China's genocide against the Uyghur minority. The world's largest warship begins its active duty service to the U.S. One official says it is particularly prepared for conflicts with communist China. The head of a Chinese state-run media suggests Beijing should bomb Australia. That's if it allies with the U.S. in protecting Taiwan. And the U.S. removes a major Chinese phone maker from a blacklist. The Trump administration had banned Americans from investing in it, citing its ties to the Chinese military. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken Wednesday released the State Department's 2020 International Religious Freedom Report. He also announced a visa ban on a Chinese official and his family for his involvement in persecuting practitioners of the spiritual discipline Falun Gong.
The State Department reports annually on religious freedom around the world. Secretary Antony Blinken hit on several key countries, including China.
And China broadly criminalizes religious expression and continues to commit crimes against humanity and genocide against Muslim Uyghurs and members of other religious and ethnic minority groups.
The report's China section is 136 pages. It details China's persecution of a range of religions, including the spiritual practice Falun Gong. Blinken announced new sanctions on a Chinese official who previously headed Chengdu's 610 office. That's the communist regime's agency solely dedicated to persecuting Falun Gong practitioners.
Today, I'm announcing the designation of Yu Wei, former office director of the so-called Central Leading Group Preventing and Dealing with Heretical Religions of Chengdu, for his involvement in gross violations of human rights, namely the arbitrary detention of Falun Gong practitioners.
Yu Wei and his family can no longer enter the United States. Former Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, says this sends a strong signal to China.
It sends them the signal that we're not going to let them get away with this war on faith.
I think this sends a strong signal to those CCP officials in China that the persecution of Falun Gong is not only illegal, it will be penalized internationally, and the international society is watching.
The State Department cites data from Minghui, a U.S.-based website dedicated to reporting on this persecution. The government report says Chinese police arrested over 6,600 Falun Gong practitioners and harassed more than 8,500 practitioners in 2020 for refusing to renounce their faith, compared with 2019, which saw over 6,100 arrested and 3,500 harassed. 83 individuals also died due to persecution. The report also quotes some NGO reports on organ harvesting in China, including the China Tribunal's judgment after an independent inquiry. The tribunal documented evidence of what they concluded is a decades-long and ongoing state-run program of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, mainly Falun Gong practitioners.
Now we've got credible findings by other entities of organ harvesting happening to Falun Gong members. And these are by outside groups that have reviewed the evidence and said, yes, this is taking place.
The U.S. has designated China a country of particular concern since 1999 under the International Religious Freedom Act for having engaged in or tolerated particularly severe violations of religious freedom.
A two-time survivor of the Chinese regime's Uyghur concentration camps is exposing atrocities there. She's telling U.S. lawmakers about the genocide happening in Xinjiang. Just a warning, some viewers may find this content disturbing.
One woman is reaching out to U.S. lawmakers. She's sharing her firsthand experience inside a Chinese concentration camp, urging U.S. politicians to sanction the Chinese regime. She describes witnessing members of the Uyghur ethnic minority suffering in a camp located in northwest China's Xinjiang region.
She was dead inside, completely finished by the rapes. The government's goal is to destroy everyone.
Xinjiang is home to China's Uyghurs. The woman testified last Thursday before the U.S. House of Representatives. She says sexual abuse was commonplace in the camps there and that she was also victimized.
I was tortured with an electric stick pushed inside my genital tract. I could hear the other woman's screams in the next room. I knew the guards were raping her. After that, she never stopped crying.
These stories aren't unique. The woman explained that the torture methods are used across the board on those detained.
All the women had to be sterilized or fitted with an IUD. Many young women were crying, screaming when they were told they would be sterilized and could never have children.
She noted that the regime detained her twice. She was taken in for the second time in 2018 for nearly a year. She recalled that Uyghurs there were forced to abandon their faith and swear loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. Every day, Uyghurs were made to watch what she described as endless videos singing Chinese leader Xi Jinping's praises. She was able to leave after 10 months of torture. Before her release, camp officials warned her against sharing her experience with others. Last year, she fled to the U.S. for protection. But now, Beijing is calling her a liar. United Nations experts and human rights groups say at least 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in camps since 2017. Witnesses say the Communist Party also subjects Uyghurs and other dissidents to forced labor. To support Uyghurs suffering under Beijing, a number of democratic countries are standing in solidarity. Ambassadors from the U.S., Britain, and Germany will speak at a UN event on Wednesday, along with human rights activists.
China's latest census data seems to paint a problematic picture: an aging workforce and record low population growth. Concerns are rising that the situation could create problems for the country's economy. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
China is facing a looming demographic crisis. This as the country's population growth hits its lowest point in half a century. This comes as Beijing releases its latest census data. And the numbers are spelling a grim story. Compared to 2010, China's population has grown to 1.4 billion. But its annual growth rate has plunged to its lowest point since the 1950s. The census data also shows an aging workforce. Beijing has been relying on a strong workforce to fuel its economic growth. But a graying workforce coupled with slow population growth could pose problems for its economy. For some Chinese residents, the data doesn't come as a surprise.
Housing prices are so high right now, and young people are under a lot of financial pressure. So for me, I would only decide to have a baby if I had a certain financial foundation.
Another resident says she believes that trend will continue.
I'm the mother of 2 children. Even though I followed the country's calls to have a second baby, I actually regret my decision, really. Because even though we're pretty well off, the biggest problem is that no one can help us without children.
She says she can sometimes go to her parents for help, but she can't always rely on them due to certain health problems.
Also, we have to work, take care of the elderly, and raise our children. For us, this is simply too troublesome.
Some Chinese residents and experts are even questioning the data's accuracy. Some have suggested Beijing may have altered the numbers because some of the figures just don't add up. An expert on China's population explained the issue with a math problem on Twitter. Chinese authorities say close to 239 million people were born between 2006 and 2020. So by 2020, this group of people will be between 0 and 14 years old. Authorities estimate the number of people in this group would have dropped to 236 million in 2020 because of premature deaths. But China's latest census data says the opposite. It states there wasn't a drop and that this group grew to over 253 million people instead. Other Chinese social media personalities have found another set of conflicting numbers. This time, the data deals with elderly citizens. Based on official census data, there was a dramatic jump in the number of citizens aged 65 or older in 2020 compared with the year before. But birth rate data from the years they were born reflect the opposite. The article that posted the finding has been deleted from Chinese social media platform WeChat. Search results say the content was reported and is in violation of internet regulations. Juliet Son, NTD News.
The head of a Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece is suggesting that Beijing should bomb Australia. That's if it allies with the U.S. in protecting Taiwan. The editor-in-chief of the Global Times, Hu Xijing, posted on Chinese social media Weibo last Friday, saying Beijing should use long-range missiles if Australia supports the U.S. in any future military conflict over Taiwan. Hu's social media post said they must know what disasters they would cause to their country if they were bold enough to coordinate with the U.S. to interfere militarily in the Taiwan problem. His warning came amid rising tensions between Australia and Beijing. About 2 weeks ago, Beijing warned the Australian government that if it wants to end the trade war, it has to support Beijing to, as they call, reunify with Taiwan. Taiwan is strongly opposed to the so-called unification under Chinese communist rule. The democratic island has its own elected leaders, constitution, and military. Communist China has never ruled Taiwan, but it has never given up the idea of annexing Taiwan by force. The regime is also ramping up its aggression over Taiwan recently. They are frequently sending military jets into Taiwan's air defense zone. The U.S. Navy has officially commissioned its new warship. The vessel was placed into active service last week, marked by a ceremony at San Diego's Naval Air Station, North Island. The USS Miguel Keith is nearly 800 feet long and cost $525 million to construct. It took 2 years to build and is the world's largest conventional power vessel. That means it is powered by coal, oil, or natural gas. Admiral Craig Fowler of the U.S. Southern Command spoke about the ship at its commissioning ceremony. He said its crew would fight on the front line against threats to the U.S. and is particularly prepared for conflicts with China. He added that the Chinese Communist Party, with its insidious and corrupt influence, seeks global dominance and to impose its version of international order. Fowler also insisted that the U.S. must stay on top of its game and continue developing the best technology and the best ships, calling it necessary in order to continue winning this global competition. The USS Miguel Keith can travel about 10,000 nautical miles at a speed of 15 knots. That's about 17 miles per hour. The ship will hold a crew of around 100 sailors and over 40 civilian mariners. The vessel's size means it acts as a mobile sea base and can accommodate the Navy's largest helicopters, the MH-53, as well as Marine Corps' F-35B jets. Admiral Craig Fowler said the Miguel Keith may travel all over the world in its lifetime to places like the South China Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. Countries in the Indo-Pacific are closely following the brewing tension between Taiwan and Beijing, and they are wondering if the Chinese regime will drag the region into war. A Japanese military expert shares with NTD his understanding of the situation.
Japanese military expert Tokishi Kaji is weighing in on a potential war between Taiwan and Beijing. He says Taiwan's hedgehog military strategy makes it hard for Chinese troops to land on the island. The strategy aims to strengthen Taiwan's defense power to protect it against potential foreign invasions. Taiwan says the weapons they buy from the U.S. are purely defensive. Kaji believes when facing the hedgehog strategy, Communist China may only deploy missiles on the other side of the Taiwan Strait, but cannot land on Taiwan.
If they land on the island, Taiwan will definitely counteract. So China's strategy is to defeat the Taiwanese people's morale using missiles.
He worries whether U.S. aircraft carriers can actually approach Taiwan in case of war. Kaji's concern comes from China's medium-range ballistic missiles. They are dubbed aircraft killers. He says these Chinese missiles have a good chance of attacking U.S. aircraft carriers.
So the U.S. is considering new strategies. The Pacific Deterrence Initiative strategy would allow it to set medium-range missiles against China all along the First Island chain.
The First Island chain refers to a group of islands in the Western Pacific. They consist of Taiwan, the Japanese Okinawa, and the Philippines. Beijing sees the chain as a series of choke points that blocks its navy from expanding east and stops it from genuinely threatening the U.S. The U.S. national defense budget grew annually during the Trump administration, but it has remained steady after Biden took office. Kaji emphasizes that Japan has to take defense responsibilities and act accordingly.
Because the U.S. defense budget doesn't see any growth, Japan will then increase its defense budget correspondingly.
He adds that this boost will be a step-by-step process. Japan's defense budget is currently around 1% of its GDP, and people may be able to expect a growth of up to 2%. But Kaji hopes the increase can be as bold as 5 to 6% by 2025. Otherwise, he says it's hard for Japan to become the center of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy.
It is Japan that initiated the proposal, so Japan must be in the center to protect the Indo-Pacific region.
Then President Trump embraced the Indo-Pacific strategy. Some European countries have also reached a consensus on preserving peace in the Indo-Pacific.
Amid tensions between the Philippines and the Chinese regime, Manila could be taking a page out of Beijing's playbook. They are planning to assert their territorial claims in the South China Sea by building military bases. The Philippine military will turn an island in the region into a logistics hub, and they will ask the president to fund the project. They also plan to install cameras around islands to monitor activities. The Philippine military chief told CNN Philippines on Monday that our objective is to drive away Chinese maritime militia and other Chinese vessels from our exclusive economic zone. Beijing claims virtually all of the South China Sea. At one point, they sent over 200 vessels into Philippine waters. The Philippines' move mirrors a similar tactic Beijing used. The Chinese regime has previously built military bases and artificial islands in the South China Sea to assert its territorial claims. Over 100 retired military leaders are warning about a threat of Marxism and socialism. They are saying today's fight to preserve the constitutional Republic of the United States is like no other time since 1776. NTD's Allison Lee has more.
At least 124 retired generals, admirals from 5 branches of the U.S. military are warning of impending danger for America. They signed an open letter Tuesday. It opens with, "Our nation is in deep peril. We are in a fight for our survival as a constitutional republic like no other time since our founding in 1776. The conflict is between supporters of socialism and Marxism versus supporters of constitutional freedom and liberty." The group of military leaders call themselves Flag Officers for America. They list a number of issues as threats to constitutional freedoms, including a lack of election integrity, government overreach through executive action, draconian lockdown measures, as well as the censorship of expression. The retired military leaders are also warning against cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party, saying it is the greatest external threat to America. The group says cooperation emboldens the regime to continue progress towards world domination, militarily, economically, politically, and technologically. They point to a number of other national security issues, including open borders, the Iran nuclear deal, energy independence, and the politicization of the military. The open letter reads, "Under the current administration, our country has taken a hard left turn towards socialism and a Marxist form of tyrannical government." The retired general's message to America is that we must support and hold accountable politicians who will act to counter socialism, Marxism, and progressivism, and support our constitutional republic. They say citizens must counter the left turn towards socialism by electing representatives who will save the constitutional republic. The survival of the whole nation is at stake, they say. During the 2020 election, a similar group of over 300 senior military leaders signed another open letter. In it, they said the 2020 election could be the most consequential since America's founding. Allison Lee, NTD News.
The U.S. is set to remove Xiaomi from its blacklist, and that's despite previous warnings that the smartphone giant is controlled by the Chinese military. NTD's Evelyn Lee has more.
The U.S. is set to remove Chinese phone maker Xiaomi from its investment blacklist. The Trump administration blacklisted it in January, saying it was owned or controlled by the Chinese military. It meant that Xiaomi would be delisted from U.S. exchanges. It would also be barred from accessing U.S. technology, hampering new product development. Xiaomi denied having ties to the Chinese military, then it sued the U.S. government. But questions have been raised about Xiaomi's founder and CEO Lei Jun. He's also a senior executive and shareholder of Chinese software company Kingsoft. The Epoch Times reports the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's military commission, requested that Kingsoft be established. The Trump administration argued that U.S. investments in these companies support the expansion and development of the CCP's military. In 2015, Chinese leader Xi Jinping unveiled a new national strategy. It ensures that the Chinese military has access to civilian companies and research programs supporting the CCP's military modernization goals. A U.S. court sided with Xiaomi in March and halted the ban. Now court filings say the two sides will resolve the litigation without further contest. Analysts say the news is no guarantee that other firms will also be removed from the list. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
Xiaomi shares rallied over 6% following the decision. The Chinese company is the world's third largest smartphone maker. Beijing is reportedly paying a little too close attention to a top hacking contest. The regime is now being accused of leveraging a prize-winning hack to target its Uyghur ethnic minority. The concerns were recently brought to light by MIT Technology Review, a magazine owned by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The contest in question first began in 2018. Contestants took aim at technology, including the Apple iPhone. Advertisements announced prizes totaling more than $1 million, and it didn't take long before one contestant stole the spotlight. The top prize went to a researcher for a top Chinese software giant. He created malicious code that could quickly and reliably take over an iPhone, leaving its user none the wiser. The code could be planted inside a web page, and any iPhone that visited an infected website would immediately fall victim. The exploit was soon handed over to Chinese authorities. Not long after, reports of a widespread iPhone hacking campaign started to emerge. It seemed to be targeting Uyghurs, using an exploit eerily similar to the competition's winning hack, among others. Media reports linked the attacks to the Chinese regime. Apple released a software fix in January 2019, fixing the digital loophole. A rare blog post confirmed the 2-month-long attack, spanning from the first-place win to Apple software fix. The United Nations has accused China of detaining over 1 million Uyghurs inside camps in China's Xinjiang region. Accounts from experts, leaked government documents, and former Xinjiang residents and detainees back up the claims. They say Uyghurs have been subjected to torture, forced sterilization, forced labor, and political brainwashing. A major Chinese state-run media has registered as a foreign agent in the U.S. It comes more than 2 years after the U.S. Justice Department ordered it to do so. On Monday, Xinhua's U.S. division registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. This makes Xinhua the third Chinese state-run media to register as a foreign agent. The other two are CGTN Television and China Daily. Xinhua has been leasing a giant screen in New York's Times Square since 2011. In February, the electronic billboard played ads promoting Beijing's global pandemic control efforts. The ads played around the same time a World Health Organization team was probing the origins of the virus. FARA filings don't show how much Xinhua paid for the billboard, but the filings disclose that Xinhua's China-based parent agency paid its U.S. branches nearly $9 million since 2020. That includes payments directly to its offices in Washington, Los Angeles, Houston, San Francisco, and Chicago. U.S.-based Center for Responsive Politics estimates the cumulative spending of Chinese foreign agents in the U.S. reached nearly $64 million in 2020. This is a 6-fold increase compared to 2016. And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have a special announcement. China in Focus is partnering with the Epoch Times newspaper on their new subscription-based streaming platform, Epoch TV. That's where you can watch our exclusive special reports every Friday night. In them, we'll explore questions like where the CCP virus actually came from, how China lures foreign companies in, steals their technology, and kicks them out, how the ancient Chinese philosophy of good governance differs from the current-day communist regime, and much more. Be sure to check out these investigative episodes by clicking on the link in the description down below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you really want to understand what's happening with China. Meanwhile, you can still watch our Monday to Thursday episodes for free on YouTube, NTD Cable TV, the NTD website, and the Epoch TV website. In the next episode of our special report, we look at what's going wrong with U.S. carmaker Tesla's love affair with China. Once a darling for the Chinese regime, Tesla is now facing an unprecedented attack from Chinese regulators and state media.
They do this every single time.
The better Tesla's development, the more nervous the Chinese regime will become.
And what does the saga have to do with the Chinese Communist Party's ambition to dominate the next generation of technologies? To find out, watch our episode on Epoch TV this coming Friday. And what does the saga have to do with the Chinese Communist Party's ambition to dominate the next generation of technology? To find out, watch our episode on Epoch TV this Friday at 9 p.m. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.